Do you feel like the internet is watching your every move? Well, that's because it is. Our browsers aren't just looking at our internet activity, they're storing our history too. It's like having a stranger standing over your shoulder. But you can put an end to this right now using today's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. Since I started using Surfshark VPN, I haven't looked back. Everything I do online now is encrypted so that no one, not even Surfshark, can see what I'm browsing. It's not just privacy you're getting here, but peace of mind. Surfshark also helps you beat the big tech censors. If it's local reporting, overseas, or geo-blocked content in your own country that you're after, Surfshark can get you access. And guess what? Just one subscription covers all of your devices. You can use Surfshark on your phone, your laptop, your tablet, your smart fridge, okay, maybe not that one, at no extra cost. They also have a brilliant product called Surfshark Alert. This is like an extra layer of digital protection. It warns you if any of your emails or passwords have been part of a data breach. It's like a digital immune system. So, free yourself from the tyranny of big tech today with Surfshark. Go to surfshark.com/lastorders or use the promo code lastorders, all one word, at the checkout for 4 extra months. That's surfshark.com/lastorders or lastorders, all one word, at checkout. You'll find all of this information in the show notes. There's also a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk if you want to check it out. Go to surfshark.com/lastorders right now.
The most obvious hypocrisy about this is that this is being proposed at a time when people who are actually 16 now will never be allowed to buy tobacco.
If you had said to people in 1918 or 23 or whatever it was when the franchise started to get open up, but within 100 years, hopefully we'll have votes for 16-year-olds. You'd have been just laughed out of the house.
But this theory, some people might say this is a bit sexist, but it's not.
Hello and welcome back to Last Orders. I'm Tom Slater, editor of Spiked, joined as I am in every episode by Chris Snowdon. How are you doing, Chris?
Very well, thanks, Tom. Hello, listeners.
And a big hello to one of our favourite returning guests, the stand-up comedian and most importantly Spiked columnist, Simon Evans. How are you doing, Simon?
Cheers. I'm very well. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for supplying refreshments.
Not at all.
On this humid kind of Tennessee Williams kind of day here in the dock.
Absolutely. We'd be remiss not to. In one of our Spike/Last Orders branded pint glasses, which we're still very much enjoying.
Thank you, Ellie.
Yeah.
Ellie, did I mention this? Ellie last year sent me is it Ellen?
Mm.
I call her Ellie.
Yeah, exactly. You're quite close now. Yeah.
She sent me the Wetherspoon calendar last year.
There you go. A good egg.
Is that Tim Martin topless in every of his more architectural splendours?
Christmas elf outfit.
Lovely Christmas. Still my only ever Spiked video, wasn't it? Interviewing Tim Martin, and it was very enjoyable. I have to say, he's a good chap, hard-working, salt of the earth. We need a few more of them.
No, absolutely. We need a few more Simon Evans interviews as well.
Yeah, we do.
We should talk about that. Before we do that, should we talk about votes for 16s? This is the latest accomplishment of this Labour government, Simon, that we knew this plan was coming, but they finally said that they're going to bring forward legislation to widen the franchise to 16 and 17-year-olds, a demand that has been made by, as far as I can tell, about 8 or 9 16 and 17-year-olds. It's not been a big popular revolt for it, but cynics among us might say that this is to do with them trying to shore up their result at the next election, given how bad things are going and how much people presume young people will vote for Labour. But what do you make of all of this?
I mean, all of that, yeah. I mean, it's a good example of the supposedly it's supposed to be a I think with the word like a myth. The slippery slope. It's supposed to be a myth, isn't it? It's supposed to be like a fallacy. A fallacy, that's the word. It's supposed to be a fallacy of the slippery slope, and philosophy students will shake their head sadly when you fall for it. It obviously does pertain. If you had said to people in 1918 or 23 or whatever it was when the franchise started to get open up, but within 100 years, hopefully we'll have votes for 16-year-olds. You'd have been just laughed out of the house. It's obviously absurd. As somebody who is currently giving house room to a 17-year-old who'll turn 18 in a couple of weeks' time, cannot decide what he wants for breakfast, what course he wants to do at university, whether he should try and do a gap year. The ability of a 16-year-old to consider second and third order effects of what are appealing policy proposals is absolutely zero. And obviously the idea is that they're expected to vote, which is how democracy works, with their own enlightened self-interest. The self-interest is fairly obvious. They will want tuition fees to be banned or whatever, or they'll want to be allowed to do more things than they're currently allowed to do and stay out later and annoy their parents. The enlightened aspect of it is just there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the average male, brain doesn't really properly start functioning like an adult until about 25. I am sympathetic, I will say this, to the plight of young people generally in this country. There's a great Tucker Carlson video doing the rounds at the moment where he's talking to it doesn't matter, I keep forgetting these names, but he's discussing how boomers have stitched up young people generally in America, and I think there's some force to that argument, and in this country definitely house prices, obviously, the triple lock on the pensions and all the rest of it. So what I would rather see than extending the franchise downwards into the depths of adolescence would be to cut it off at about 75, and just have those people who are, not some pensioners obviously, but people broadly speaking who still have some sort of grasp and purchase on the economic activity of the country, in theory at least, having a vote, and people who are essentially inevitably going to be in the freeloader category, just being, gradually sidelined.
So sort of 25 to 75 is the sort of sweet spot.
I would be happy with that. I would be happy to give up my vote at 75. I'm not saying people who are 75 don't understand how politics works. They often do. But, the reality is they are only... Most people, in truth, I think, are, if not single-issue voters, they probably entertain 2 or 3, significant aspects of the manifesto. And most of them will be thinking very much in terms of, well, what's in it for me, and we are sliding very, very swiftly into a nation economy, a mode where more people are net beneficiaries of the state than they are contributors, and that is an absolute death spiral.
And Chris, obviously, we know that a lot of this is cynical. We know that a lot of this is politically motivated. Not least because of how little sense it makes. There's all sorts of things that people can't do age 16 anymore. They can't buy cigarettes age 16 anymore. They can't get married even with parental consent at age 16 anymore. There's always this claim brought up that, well, they can go to work and pay taxes, but many few
can join the army.
They can join the army,
but
they can't.
Cadets.
No, exactly. And they can't serve. It's not like Keir Starmer is also actively campaigning for them to be shot at on foreign battlefields or what have you. So clearly this doesn't stack up. But I know that you've got a kind of counter solution or policy proposal to this votes at 16 situation.
Yeah, I'd say the opposite view to Simon. I mean, obviously in this instance is very blatant gerrymandering, and the kind of arguments for or against have followed fairly predictable grounds. And you've had like regime journalists like Lewis Goodall going, "Oh, if you don't approve of this and you don't approve of progress, and you wouldn't, you want to put kids back back up the chimneys and so on." It's an obvious way.
It's an honest day's work.
It's obvious why Labour are doing it. It's obvious why the Tories oppose it. But I do think that once you're 16, you're basically an adult. And I think that should be across the board. And we put everything up over the years. As you said, even the marriage now has gone up to 18. Smoking, I mean, the most obvious hypocrisy about this is that this is being proposed at a time when people who are actually 16 now will never be allowed to buy tobacco. Right? So they'll be able to vote, but never allowed to buy tobacco. I think it should be 16 across the board. It's 16. It used to be 16 for smoking, which sounds kind of weird now, doesn't it? When it's always been 18 for drinking. Well, not for drinking, actually. Do you know what the age is for drinking, as opposed to buying alcohol? There is a legal age for drinking.
What, drinking at home if you haven't bought it?
Yeah, just the act of drinking alcohol. It's 5.
Yeah,
wow.
That is what I've been basing my parental.
But it's like, why? A lot of countries don't have an age for drinking. Like, there isn't an age for smoking. It's just an age at which you can buy cigarettes. But we decided to introduce an age just for drinking, but made it 5. So why really bother? Anyway, that's by the by. I wouldn't say we should have votes at 5, but I would like to see drinking, gambling, vaping, all this other stuff be 16. Therefore, I would be hypocritical to say you shouldn't be allowed to vote at 16. Most 16, 17-year-olds do know that they're naive and ignorant, which is why actually that age group doesn't vote very much. And if you look at opinion polls, which split up the answers by ages, the 18 to 25 group is always the one which has the largest number of don't knows. So at least they are largely aware of their ignorance, which I think is quite good. But it should be 16 for everything. I remember when Wayne Rooney scored his first goal for Everton all those years ago. when he was 16, might even been 15.
16 going on 45.
Yeah, well, I just looked
but
at
he
him
was a boy wonder, wasn't he? You know?
He was a bit of a freak, and he's only 40 now. He looks about 70.
You know, exactly.
I remember at the time thinking, like,
it's like a Labrador.
I remember the time.
It's
It's
making
mad
the
that he
policy
is
on the basis of
technically.
edge cases. You know, this is a sort
Well,
of
no,
exactly.
because the same.
He's an outlier.
The same broadly applies to other
and
people.
I still wouldn't allow him to vote, incidentally.
You wouldn't call even now, even today. Should never be allowed to vote.
He'd be favour of the triple lock.
But I remember thinking at the time, like, it's mad that he is technically a child, and the same is true really of most 16 and 17-year-olds. Simon might be a bit different with his son, but generally speaking, you would not refer to a 17-year-old to his or her face as a child. It would seem ridiculous. They're not really children, obviously.
Like in Glengarry Glen Ross, you're a child.
I haven't seen that.
Where he
I haven't seen the film.
tells Jack Lemmon, you know,
Does he?
It's the worst. It's in a real estate.
I know. I've heard a lot about
It's
it.
a fantastic David Mamet play. Alec Baldwin is astonishing. He has a cameo scene in it, and I think Pacino as well uses the term child is the worst insult they can deliver. They use really strong language as well. Mamet peppers every sentence with the F's and C's, but but child.
Yeah, it's insulting, but it's also kind of not true when you're dealing with somebody who's basically fully grown. And of course, I don't know as much as politics as some people do, but a lot of people, a hell of a lot of people over the age of 18, don't know anything about politics or economics either.
True.
So I would be perfectly laid back about this bit of blatant gerrymandering if they dropped everything else.
The country would be in a better position, as indeed would almost every liberal democracy around the world, if they assigned voting rights only to property holding.
Well, I was going to say,
I don't
think we should make it. Only you'd have to be a large landowner.
I do
I
have
think
one.
you should have to own a bit of land.
And
I have
property
one
owning has
serious
become a bit of the
suggestion.
problem,
I
surely.
have one serious suggestion on this, possibly, if we're going to start trying to elevate 16-year-olds to adult responsibilities, full spectrum drinking and smoking and what have you. You should probably get something approaching a provisional license, essentially, at 16. And you have to show that when you go into a pub. I'm 16, I have a provisional license to drink. Mm-hmm. And that license can then be withdrawn if you get drunk and cause trouble, if you make a mess of the place.
3 points.
3 points, and after totting up over any 24-month period until you're 18, and that license can be withdrawn.
It's an idea. But there is a kind of, well, I'm making a serious point, but I'll make another serious point, which is that it didn't really matter that everything was 18 when the rules were quite loosely enforced.
Yeah.
But these days, everything's really strictly enforced.
Yeah.
And everyone knows deep down there's nothing wrong with 16 and 17-year-olds going to the pub after school, having some sixth formers in. And when I was that age, people turned a blind eye to it. But now it's very rigidly enforced. Yeah. And
Challenge 37 or whatever.
Yeah, right. So effectively, it was always 16. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it was officially 18, and that would give
like
the police a bit of
leeway. Motorway speed limit, essentially. The 10 miles an hour is the margin of error which would not be enforced.
Right, exactly. But if they actually enforced it to the letter, which I think they're increasingly doing, they certainly do with the 20-mile limits,
well, again,
then
because
you've got to lift the limit.
A lot of bar employees are themselves not entirely confident of assessing and judging the situation. They feel more like they are employees of a corporate structure rather than the landlord, and then he's exactly. So a lot of the old school charm of the pub has gone. But I totally agree with you about 16 and 17-year-olds should be allowed to drink in pubs, especially the kind of pubs where they are likely to fall into conversation or be monitored at least to some extent by their elders, by strangers who they just learn to be, as Peterson says, learn how to be a man amongst men, and women too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And learn how to drink properly as well. Because that's one thing that you certainly see in America, where these things have been quite heavily enforced up until the age of 21 for a long time.
Can't drink at all.
They go to university and they just, end up in a coma because they've one too many.
They start shotgunning things and I've got a keg. Ooh, you got a keg. Let's have a big party. Make a big song and dance about it. Have drinking games and all this kind of stuff because they can't drink till they're 21.
Whereas in this country, when the Germans invaded Pearl Harbor.
In this country, a lot of people are thinking about cutting down by the time they're 21. Mm-hmm. They've done their apprenticeship.
Put the hard yards in. It would be funny though, because given the kind of anecdotal, there's some survey evidence now that a higher proportion of even quite young people are turning towards reform, nowhere near a majority or whatever, but more than was expected if that became the cherry on the cake of the reform landslide as a consequence of this policy.
That could easily happen, because one thing that young people will encounter, probably not 16 to 18-year-olds, but young people will encounter the effect that unchecked immigration and undocumented immigration is having on rental prices, especially in London. I think this is the kind of thing they're going to actually encounter a real world effect of what they're currently encouraged to treat in sixth form debating society as if it was, Rawls' veil of ignorance or whatever, and just a totally hypothetical. And then they'll come out onto the street and realise that there are no jobs, they cannot afford to live in the capital, and it will filter through to them why that might be.
And he can't buy tobacco.
Yeah,
no, exactly.
Farage, pro tobacco candidate.
But let's move on, Simon, and talk a bit about Edinburgh. You're going up to the Edinburgh Festival.
Yeah.
To perform 2 shows, I understand, this year. Do you want to tell us about them before we get into this segment about what's going on with Edinburgh?
By all means. I've been touring Have We Met for the last 2 years now, and it's become at least 2 hours long every night, and I'm going to try and condense that back down into a 1 hour long victory lap at 2 o'clock every day. And then in the same venue, it's called The Caves in Cowgate. I've got a new show in the evening, which is a lot looser, and where I'm trying to... the theme is essentially a little sort of self-help advice epigram, which I discovered on Twitter a while ago, which I really like. The secret is to living a fulfilling life and enjoying the, riding the waves, is to increase the surface area exposed to luck. Certainly when you're young, anyway. Obviously, a certain amount of financial planning is a good idea as a backup, but living in such a way as to expose the amount. So it's an argument, for instance, for going out in the evening rather than something in front of Netflix. And just, allowing yourself to meet people and fall into conversation and so on. So I'm trying to kind of keep that theme not only to be explored explicitly, but also in the way the show goes. So that's going to be taking a deep breath and a lot looser structure. But the thing with Edinburgh that has a bearing on this is the extent to which accommodation prices have absolutely skyrocketed in the last few years due to no doubt well-meaning legislation in Edinburgh, which makes it much more difficult to make student accommodation, especially available for short-term lets in the summer.
What's the legislation?
I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it came in 2022, and it was intended, I think, to stop landlords turfing students out during the summer so that they could then earn a fortune with a flat. Because a decent three-bedroom
no
student
false eviction stuff.
No, it's not eviction. It's just about you being gone for the month of August. Because, a student flat in Edinburgh, I guess a 3-bedroom flat might be, let's say, $3,000 a month. And during August, you can get at least $10,000 a month for it. If it's because some of these student flats are amazing. A lot of Edinburgh property, the tenements, 12-foot ceilings, huge dimensions, very, very elegant living. And you go in and it's got, the furniture's a bit IKEA, but essentially, these are great places to stay. Hardly any of those are available anymore. And
because the students are still in there?
Well, the students aren't allowed to sublet them.
Right.
And the landlords aren't allowed to turf the students out. So they've just fallen out of the market entirely. It's absolutely absurd. You would think it would be possible to include a clause in the contract where the students and the landlords agree between them. Will we hand it back to you in August, or will you allow us to, take care of that? But instead, neither has happened. And the entire... available real estate has just fallen off a cliff. And as a consequence, loads of people don't go anymore. The Edinburgh Fringe used to be an extraordinary sort of rite of passage for early on, but it's also the best way to get a show road ready, basically. You do 28 days on the trot there, and by the end of it, you've got something that works. It's up on its feet and it's ready to go on your little tour around the country, A lot of better acts now basically go up for 2 or 3 days in a large venue. They suck all of the life out of the smaller venues. There are a lot of people struggling. A lot of acts expect to lose between 10 and 15 grand just from going there,
really?
Which is unsustainable, obviously. Yeah.
And that's largely because of the hotel prices.
Hotel prices, and then advertising, marketing costs on top of that. And then obviously there's a fairly ruthless door split with Edinburgh venues. Generally, if you tour venues, you get something around 75% of the ticket take, but in Edinburgh it's more like 60%. But that's fair enough because the venues have got costs as well. But
is being a stand-up becoming more of a privileged thing now? Do you have to have a bit of mummy and daddy behind you?
I don't think it's mummy and daddy exactly, but I think what it is, people are finding alternative platforms on which to get launched. Obviously, TikTok is a big one, or somebody like Finn Taylor, who's fantastic, very funny, very sharp, an incredibly hardworking and productive comedian. He's got a really funny YouTube series, which I discovered myself quite recently, Finn Taylor versus the Internet, which is just brilliant. And he's building enough of a fan base from that not to have to bother with Edinburgh anymore. And he's got young kids. I don't know if he's going up this year. He's done a few shows, but if you can do that and you can get your fan base knowing who you are, and obviously you put your actual click-onable, hyperlink at the bottom of the footage, then Edinburgh becomes obsolete, really.
And in what other ways have you seen it change over the years, Simon? Because how many Edinburghs will this be? as of this year for you?
Well, as a performer, 96 was my first one. I haven't been every year since. I had a layoff period between 2003 and 2010 while the kids were young. But most other years I've been up there. 96 to now. Well, firstly, I do, I'm afraid, think that stand-up is in a little bit of a doldrums at the moment. It's not incredibly creative. It's not incredibly original. There are some great acts like Finn, as I say, but broadly speaking, it has sort of devolved into, I'm afraid ID politics got quite heavily involved in it, and an awful lot of people are essentially standing up to talk about which specific, mental health disorder they struggle with or whatever. And in my first year, I have all the old Perrier shortlist, people like Bill Bailey, Dylan Moran, Harry Hill, Eddie Izzard. There were some really tremendous acts still doing ours up there. I don't feel like there's that quality. There is also that slightly censorious, kind of cancel culture thing, although I don't think that's quite as significant as we might think. What I do think, honestly, is it's actually become quite sleazy, really. There's a quite unexpected, there's an awful lot of drag acts, there's an awful lot of burlesque, and I'm not myself being kind of, morally outraged by these things, but the general vibe on the street, a lot of the bigger pictures and posters you see are for what amount to sort of late night cabaret, which is, a little bit sort of Weimar.
I
so that's fine. That would be fine if it was
going,
part of the mix, but I feel like that's been sucked into a space that used to be held by a lot more spiky, genuinely alternative comedy offerings.
I see they're not doing the joke of the Fringe anymore, which, judging by some of the recent jokes of the Fringe, is probably a good thing. Because they made,
not because they're so offensive.
No, they just made Christmas crackers look hilarious. I mean, it was almost like they were deliberately picking the worst one. It was quite remarkable.
Well, there was one that won 2 years ago, which was, I was going out with a bloke who worked at the zoo, but he turned out to be a cheater.
Oh,
and that actually won. And I thought that must be, in context, a deliberately bad joke. The joke must be that the comedian has got mixed up between, I was going out with a bloke who worked at the zoo, he's a keeper, which is an old joke, but is a joke.
Right.
And then, he's a keeper as in I'm going to hold on to him. And then, why can't you play cards in the zoo? Too many cheaters. So those are two old jokes. And I think the joke was that they got commingled in this comedian's head. And so you were laughing at them for being hapless.
I see, okay.
But it was then put as one of 10 that the general public were allowed to vote for in the national newspapers, and they voted for that one. They still went for it. And they cannot possibly have seen the context. Yeah.
I thought he was voted for by the people at Dave.
They're curated by Dave Hobbits or whatever who go out, Munchkins, and then they bring them back, and then they're voted on by them. So I think that might have been a sort of jokey McJoke face kind of thing.
I see. It's a meta joke.
Yeah. But anyway, I don't know.
The best one I can remember, I think it was Dan Antopolsky. Is that how you pronounce it? Very simple joke. Just said, hedgehogs. Why can't they share the hedge?
Yeah. He's great at those jokes. Joke. He's a genuine linguist and a genius IQ, and he makes, like Tim Vine, those funny little jokes that are very simple, but nevertheless, I went on a once-in-a-lifetime holiday. I tell you what, never again. Jokes like that are lovely, joyful. You don't have to change the world with them, but they've got to show a little pinch of wit.
So anyone who's keen to catch either of Simon's shows or both of them, of course, should go to your website, I imagine, where everything is lined up, or just the Ed Fringe website.
TheSimonEvans.com, and you will find everything you need there, all the links. And I've got a couple of shows which I will mention because spiked audience will like this. They're at the Unleashed venue called the Backyard Comedy Club in Bethnal Green, 21st and 22nd of September. And I'm recording my last two tour shows, finally, for posterity. Don't know where they'll go, cool. Maybe YouTube or maybe, Netflix special is in the offing. But anyway, so it'd be great to see you at that one. And ticket prices are low for London events, specifically to lure people in, so they've got a huge, happy-looking crowd. Yeah,
that's what it's all about. So, Chris, shall we briefly, at least, turn to Lucy Letby Corner?
Lucy Letby Corner.
Not that much news this week compared to recent weeks, where it's
dominated
most of the podcast.
This nanny state allegedly
quite an interesting development in that this woman called Stephanie Davis, who used to work in the coroner's office in Cheshire, she's come out to bat for Letby. And what's interesting about her is really her backstory, because she, while working in her job there, took it on herself to start doing a bit of private investigation into a bunch of murder-suicides in the Northwest. So these are old people who basically, one of them kills the other and then kills themselves, very often because they've got dementia.
Or irritation.
But they seem to be pretty clear-cut murder-suicides. And there was a spate of these. Well, not even a spate, really. There were 5 in the space of 15 years. 3 of which were fairly close together in Manchester. The other 2 were nowhere near. But she decided that these were linked and, in fact, were not murder-suicides, but were just murders by a serial killer. And she was doing a PhD in unsolved crime at the time, so I suspect she was looking for content to some extent. I don't remember all the details, but basically she contacted some journalists, apparently shared some confidential, crime scene photos and that kind of thing that she wasn't supposed to. The police were going to sack her for gross misconduct, but she resigned before she could do so. Now, it's quite an interesting rabbit hole to go down, actually, these murder-suicides. Pretty interesting, a bit more interesting than Letby in a way. Apparently, she was barking up the wrong tree. The families of these people say there was nothing suspicious about them at all.
Yeah.
The implication seems to be she was a bit of a crackpot who was essentially sacked for gross misconduct. But she's now coming out batting for Letby. She did an interview with The Guardian, did an interview with the Channel 4 News. No one made much of the fairly significant point that this is somebody who has already lost her job for coming up with bizarre theories. She used to see murders where there were none. Now she sees nothing when there are murders. I don't think she's going to be a star witness in any retrial.
But it's good that we're putting a pin in all of these claims as we go along.
Someone's got to give proper full coverage of the Letby story.
And it falls to the Anti-Nanny State podcasters.
For some reason, yeah.
Particular
It reminds me a little bit of the room not Naomi Klein, is it? The other Naomi
Wolf. They get mixed up a lot, hence her doppelganger.
Yeah. On the with the Matthew Sweet interview where he explains. That's right. Yeah.
Yes, absolute classic moment.
There we go. We're fast running out of time, so should we turn to our bonus round segments? Beginning, Simon, with I'm not sure if you have answered this question. I think maybe at our live show. Whereas on this podcast, given the fact that we're very libertarian and anti-ban, we do ask our guests to indulge their inner authoritarian. Let us know if you had to have one ban, one extra on top of last time, I suppose. What would it be?
You are a dictator.
I am beginning to think we should ban Deliveroo, or at least ban those weird sort of folding electric bikes that they swoop around on and invariably wear dark clothing hood. They look so sinister. I'm not sure it's good for people at all to get into the habit of ordering out on a regular basis. Anyway, I think if you want takeaway, that's fine, but you should at least get, half of your 10,000 steps can be a stroll down to the local tandoori. But yeah, I mean, in Hove, where I live, which is quintessential England, as you know,
Absolutely.
Chris, the streets at night, it's almost like living under curfew with some weird sort of quasi-uniformed military police patrolling the place. Terrifying. And obviously, as we know, they are considered to be the default access to income for undocumented migrants, and legislation is underway, I think, to possibly prevent that from being the case. But to be honest, it's a vibe thing as much as anything for me. Yeah.
No, absolutely. They're always got the balaclava on, seemingly, for rain or shine, hot or cold.
And those bikes, which I bought an electric bike and it wasn't cheap, and I still have to pedal. How come theirs just seem to work like mopeds?
Yeah.
They just zoom along. I think they must have been chipped or something. I don't know how it works.
Isn't that the point of an electric bike?
No, electric bikes.
You're not supposed to pedal.
No, you're supposed to. It's like the line bike. You've got to pedal, and then it enhances or whatever.
Oh, really?
Like gives you that
A bit
extra
turbo.
Yeah. There's a. I'm so bad with the words today. Charlie Kirk, though, was the bloke that Tucker was interviewing.
So in case you were wondering earlier, we've closed that particular loop for you. But I think that'll be a very popular choice. There's also another bonus round question, which we're still kind of, sort of soft launching, I think, because about half the guests we've asked it to have been slightly stumped by it. But Chris has this theory question. That everyone has a theory.
Yes.
And I understand you've got a new one, Chris.
Yeah, well, it's not a new one. It's just one that I've remembered. The thing about this, have you got a theory thing, Simon, is I think everyone's got lots of theories. I'm sure you have. But it's difficult to remember them on demand.
Yeah.
And so my theories are coming to me bit by bit. I actually remembered 2 the other day, but I've already forgotten the second one. But this theory, some people might say this is a bit sexist, but it's not. So if you're worried about it, it's not. It's just an observation. My theory is that some women, not all, not even most, but some women are being held back in the workforce to the extent that women are being held back in the workforce these days, which is not very much. But I think they do even better if they didn't do this thing I'm about to describe. I think they're held back largely through a lack of good networking opportunities, because some of them are not able, seemingly, to adjust their speaking voice to at least match the background noise in a room.
Oh.
So, for example, you're talking to someone. I've never noticed a man do this, so I'm specifying. It's possible that some men do it, but I think men, if you say, can you speak up, they just speak up. Whereas the kind of people I'm talking about will speak up for about 3 seconds and immediately go back to what they consider to be their normal speaking voice, which is adequate for any environment. But if you're in a noisy restaurant, echoey restaurant, or a loud pub or something like that, a certain type of woman, usually a very intelligent woman, will just speak in her normal voice as if you're in a quiet room and won't make any effort to try and keep up with the ambient noise. And the effects of that is that, a lot of life's opportunities come at you through kind of social or semi-social events. And in the end, you just stop talking to them because you can only spend so long sort of going like this, hoping that they're going to pick up on the not particularly subtle non-verbal communication.
Your ear to their
Sorry,
mouth.
can you speak up? And eventually you just can't, you're nodding along, pretending to know what they're saying, and you don't know what they're saying. And it doesn't matter that I don't understand what they're saying, but I could be a big businessman with a string of business opportunities to bestow on someone, and I stop talking to them and talk to somebody who can speak a bit more loudly. So that's my theory, that this may explain part of the gender wage gap.
There we go. Simon, any thoughts
Should
on
I
that? Or have you
respond
got
to
your
that?
own one?
I haven't specifically noticed it in women, and I am, I'm as open and available to fundamentally misogynist characterizations of behaviour as anyone. But I do think there are some people who do that. Definitely, yeah. I think those kind of skills, funnily enough, are those which are often not taught adequately at school or at least university. Famously, private school, that's one of the things people come out with, completely unapologetic level of amplification of their voice, speak loudly and boorishly about whatever thought crosses their mind. And this is regarded as confidence.
Yeah, a lot of men go too far in the other direction, I'll give you that.
Yeah. But generally speaking, the avowed libertarian Charles Murray,
yes,
most famous stroke notorious for a book, The Bell Curve, but he's written on a lot of other issues over the years. And I've got one book of his, which I keep waiting for the perfect time to introduce to my daughter, which is, I think it's called A Curmudgeon's Guide to the Workplace, and it's intended for young people to learn how to handle themselves. And it's full of lots of good advice, such as spend at least 6 months living in a country where English is not only the first language, but not even widely spoken, and learn how to get along in a place like that.
You're not sure about that one, Chris.
And certainly out of contact with your parents and things. But one of the things he talks about is certain, and it's written years ago, but it was already a thing, vocal fry, the Australian rising intonation, that kind of way of speaking in such a way as to suggest you're not quite confident about what you're saying.
That's very annoying.
And the use of like as a placeholder every third word, which is horribly contagious. Young people all do it, but I've noticed also, and I don't think she'll watch this, so I'm safe to say it, my wife does it when the kids were around. When she's talking to her daughter, or when she's like hoping to sort of become amenable and sympathetic with the young people, that's what she will do, and when she has been spending time with certain other friends. I find it absolutely intolerable. My mind clouds, the red mist descends. I cannot follow the importance or the significance or the intention of the conversation at all, because I'm just focused on this infuriating verbal tick, which I know is a dysfunction on my part. So Charles Murray says, you will find that your job opportunities, however unreasonable or however unacceptable it might be to your moral code, they do rest with a lot of people who find this sort of thing tiresome. And if you can just train yourself out of it, there's no shame in just pausing briefly if you're trying to think what your next words should be, as I increasingly do myself as I try and struggle for key members of the right wing American commentariat. But it's a general drift towards lazy speech. I don't know what you're talking about is lazy, but there is not monitoring your speech habits and not being confident and trained is definitely something that will hold you back in almost every job. Not all of them. There are some where a sort of almost autistic level of inward-looking interiority might be considered to be a boon. I think some coding cultures regard that as absolutely ideal. But yeah,
I've noticed the same thing occasionally when I'm giving a talk in a not a massive room, but a reasonable sized room, and people ask questions, but we haven't got a microphone. Some people will just ask the question in their normal, quiet voice. They just don't seem to realise that sometimes you have
It's
to...
almost a theory of mind thing, isn't it? It suggests you aren't aware of how other people.
It's a lack of awareness, completely.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get it, and maybe it is men as well. I'd rather it was because I don't want to sound sexist, but just as a general, life tip. Try and have a firm handshake and speak so people can hear.
Of things you can learn, and I've never learned it myself. I wish I did 30 years ago, probably too late now, but to learn to actually project like an actor, to speak with diaphragm breathing and sort of speak like this, like Margaret Thatcher had those lessons where she dropped like an entire octave. And, well, of course, David, what you have to understand, sooner or later, you run out of other people's money. And it sounds very much more impressive, But there are a few comedians I know who can speak like that, or just naturally do. And they can project to the back of the London Palladium without a microphone. It's an extraordinarily useful skill. I think most humans we have evolved to actually bestow an extraordinary amount of respect, a perceived authority onto people who can speak in that way.
But Simon, what's your theory then, now that you've heard Chris's latest slightly sexist one?
Well, I know Chris mentioned earlier he has a theory about how the pandemic affected all of us. And I actually have quite a lot of theories about it. I don't think it was a remotely trivial event in our mental health, in our economic situation, our prosperity, and in the trajectory of Western civilization. And I think a lot of young people are damaged by it. But also, people of my generation, I know several people who have come out of that pandemic with a distinctly shaken confidence, not just in the government or in authority figures that used to be trusted, such as the NHS or the American equivalent and so on, but in the nature of reality itself, I think, like a really, people who've sort of started to entertain the possibility that, all the maddest conspiracy theories, flat Earth and so on, because so many lies were told to us and so many palpable total 180s were committed by the government over the course of that time that you just think, well, if they will lie about that, what else have they possibly been lying about because it's useful, and it goes all the way back to Plato. Who has two famous insights. One, that we all live in a cave and we take the shadow puppets for reality, but also advocated the noble lie, in the Republic, to say that in order to help people adjust and align with their prospects in life, you have to tell some people, you're gold, you're silver, you're bronze. Bronze, you are going to be doing the manual labour, bronze, silver and gold, you're destined for administrative and governmental tasks and so on. And there is always this perception that it can happen. And the latest thing is, of course, Donald Trump dropping the Epstein list as apparently of no consequence. That is of consequence. You cannot just sweep that away. That was an extraordinarily vivid demonstration, an illustration of the corruption at the very heart of government. And whether or not it's just to protect his own involvement and visits to the island, or whether it is because Epstein was himself an intelligence asset for another, foreign country, the most obvious one being Mossad, you cannot just expect people to forget these things. It happens far too often now, and people's memories are not quite short. And even if they forget what it is that specifically created that sense, that queasiness in their stomach, that knot of anxiety, they may forget what caused it, but they won't forget how they feel every time they think about the government.
Wow, that's quite a monologue.
Yeah, thank you.
Finally, a proper theory for this segment is what we've been struggling to get. Simon, Chris, thank you both very much. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Last Orders. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and click the bell so you never miss another spiked video. If you're listening to this on your podcast app, make sure you subscribe there and give us a glowing 5-star review. And if you'd like to get in touch with your questions or band suggestions, email us at lastorders@spiked-online.com.